sound of a single slow exhalation, like air being let out of a balloon, followed by the soft clink of glass on wood. Begin with a gripping hook. The last thing my mentor Marcus Thorne ever said to me wasn't, "I'm sorry." It wasn't, "You were right." It was, "Leo, for God's sake, you're seeing ghosts in the soil." He said it with a pitying little smile, right after he slid the falsified report across his polished mahogany desk, the one with my forged signature at the bottom, approving the use of Hexa 7 on the North Ridge farmlands. The lie was perfect. The frame was solid. My career, my life's work as an agricultural inspector, was over. He poisoned the land, and to cover it up, he buried me right alongside it. But he was wrong about one thing. The ghosts weren't in the soil. Not yet. They were just waiting for something to grow from. The exile into the unknown and obsessive descent. You have to understand, being blacklisted in my field, it's a death sentence. No one would touch me. My phone went silent. My colleagues, friends I'd had for a decade, would cross the street to avoid me. The official story was that I'd had a breakdown, that I'd fabricated the data on Hexa 7's toxicity out of some paranoid delusion. The shame was a physical thing. It followed me home, and my family. God, my family. They weren't just disappointed, they were horrified. My father, a man who believed in pensions and handshakes, sat me down in our beige living room, the air thick with the smell of stale coffee and failure. "You threw it all away, Leo," he said, his voice quiet, which was always worse than shouting. "A good, respectable life, all to chase shadows." My sister Sarah was more direct. "People are talking," she'd hiss over the phone. "They think you're a crank. You're embarrassing us." So I left. I took what little I had and bought a derelict farmhouse on 3 acres of forgotten land, bordering an abandoned 19th century cemetery. I was in exile, and in that exile, the obsession took root. Thorne's words echoed in my head. Ghosts in the soil. It got me thinking about old folklore. Whispers from the agricultural fringes I'd always dismissed as rural nonsense. Tales of plants that only grew in desecrated ground. Of flora that drew its nutrients not from nitrates and phosphates, but from something else. Thanatobotany. The botany of death. I started my research. I spent my days in the old boneyard, mapping the graves, taking soil samples. My nights were a frantic haze of ancient agricultural texts and forbidden biological treatises. My peers, the few who'd still reply to an anonymous email, ridiculed me. "Macabre nonsense, Leo. You've truly lost it. This is professional suicide." I was already dead to them, so what did it matter? I was looking for a specific legend, the Mors-flos, the corpse-eater's bloom. A carnivorous plant rumored to grow only from the soil of the improperly buried, the unmourned, the violently betrayed. A plant that didn't just consume insects, but the very essence of the decay it fed upon. The horrific trials and dark triumph. I found the first seed pod in the grave of a woman named Elspeth, who, according to local legend, was poisoned by her husband in 1888. The pod was no bigger than my thumb, black and veined like a clot of dried blood. I took it back to my makeshift greenhouse, a plastic-draped skeleton behind the farmhouse. I planted it in the soil from her grave, and I waited. The thing that grew was not of this world. It was monstrously beautiful. Its stem was a pale, waxy white, latticed with veins that pulsed with a faint lavender light in the dark. Its leaves were like grasping skeletal fingers. And the bloom. The bloom was a fleshy, trumpet-shaped maw, lined with what looked like silken, vibrating hairs. It gave off a scent of damp earth, grave soil, and something sickeningly sweet, like overripe fruit and forgotten perfume. It wouldn't take dead insects or raw meat. I realized, with a cold dread that settled deep in my bones, what it truly craved. It was a symbiosis. It needed the echo of a life. I started with a lock of my own hair, then a drop of my blood. The plant responded. It thrived. I documented everything, its growth cycle, its feeding habits, its unnerving ability to mimic the quietest whispers of the wind, sounding almost like a woman's sigh. The real horror began when I started cultivating more. I found other graves, other seeds. Each plant was unique, a living tombstone reflecting the tragedy of its source. A soldier's grave yielded a flower with petals like blood-soaked rags. A child's grave produced a small weeping bell of a plant that chimed softly when you passed. They were my children. My terrible, beautiful harvest. My breakthrough, my dark triumph, came not as a celebrated academic paper, but as a frantic, encrypted message. Biocontainment firm, hired by Thorne's parent company, had a disaster. A new pesticide of theirs, a derivative of Hexa-7, had leaked. The land it soaked wasn't just barren, it was active, aggressive. Unidentifiable flora was choking out everything, growing with unnatural speed. They'd found my macabre online research. The crank from the fringe was now the world's only expert. They didn't call me a madman, they called me a specialist. And they paid me a fortune to come and teach them how to placate the ghosts they'd woken up in the soil. The return and unearthed truth. My father's 70th birthday. It was the first time I'd seen them all in 5 years. I was no longer the disgraced son. I was a name whispered in certain circles. A man who consults on matters no one wants to admit are real. I was a success, but the nature of that success clung to me like a shroud. The dinner was tense. The old silences were there, but now they were laced with a new kind of fear. They saw the change in me, the hollows under my eyes, the quiet way I moved, the way I watched the world as if listening for something they couldn't hear. So, my father finally said, trying for his old authoritative tone, "This consulting work? It's going well?" "It's resolved," I said, my voice flat. Sarah jumped in, her smile brittle. "We heard you're some kind of expert in botany?" The word felt ridiculous in her mouth. She still saw the boy chasing shadows. I didn't answer. I just reached down and lifted the case I'd brought with me, placing it on the table. It was a climate-controlled, reinforced glass terrarium. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark, rich soil, was a single perfect specimen, a Mors-flos, pale, elegant, and dormant. "What in God's name is that, Leo?" my mother whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "Proof," I said, "that I wasn't chasing shadows. The shadows were just waiting for the right conditions to grow." My father scoffed, a reflex of disbelief. "It's just a flower, son. A strange one, but—" "It's hungry," I interrupted, my gaze level with his. "It feeds on memory. On the remnants of a life." I looked at the old mantelpiece, at the silver box where my mother kept keepsakes. "Mom, I need the locket, the one with Grandma's hair in it." The color drained from her face. "Leo, no, don't be grotesque." "It's the only way you'll understand what you set me out into," I said, my voice cracking with 5 years of buried pain. "It's the only way you'll see the cost of your disbelief." Hesitantly, shakily, my mother retrieved the locket. My father tried to protest, but the look in my eyes silenced him. With trembling fingers, I opened the terrarium's feeding port, a small iris valve. I took the tiny, brittle lock of white hair and dropped it in. We all watched. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the flower began to unfurl. The pale, fleshy petals peeled back, not like a bloom opening to the sun, but like lips parting in a silent scream. The air filled with that sweet, sickening scent of earth and forgotten perfume. And inside the flower's maw, where the stamen should have been, the air shimmered. An image began